Welcome to a true spiritual adventure story like the world has never known with your host, Dr. James Yogati Weldon. Good day, this is Dr. Jim Weldon speaking to you from Heavenly Mountain in Boone, North Carolina. Our community, which is dedicated to bridging the gaps in our understanding between the different traditions of the world and opening the possibility of living a divine life. Today is a continuation of my surprising adventure story behind the greatest story ever told, about the life of Jesus in India, how he traveled there as a child, sent by the wise men, and now he's returned to his homeland. This is one of the most exciting times for him, the time that he's going to be tried and put to death. And this has been coming for a while. It was foreseen by his spiritual teacher many, many years ago. And he was shown a vision of this when he was quite young. And now he's in the middle of it. The things that happen in this world are a great drama. And the truth behind the teachings of Jesus is that what we really are could never be destroyed. If you were to make a great movie, you couldn't make one more unbelievable than the one we're actually living. And the very simple teachings that he gave, that the kingdom of heaven is within you, and that there's a way to live that, were completely misunderstood by those individuals that listened to him, even his closest students. And after John the Baptist was killed, he knew the time was coming and had talked to his closest students, his disciples, that they should protect themselves. But on the other hand, after he was arrested and imprisoned, he was going to be tried. And unless there was someone to speak on his behalf, he would be speaking on his own behalf. He'd taken the attitude that he was going to be defenseless. He was willing to accept whatever would come because he'd been shown the divine life had been united with the cosmic existence, the father and mother of all of us. That force had come in to join with him to really provide some relief for those individuals in that part of the world at this time. And so that night before his trial was honestly the dark night of the soul for him. And as he was imprisoned with other individuals who had been murderers, and of course he had known and been around such individuals, criminals, but mostly the simple folk that he met as he traveled around that part of the world, he knew what was in their hearts, and that was love. True love is really what we are made of, and that substance is our very existence. Yet when we mistake the love that we are seeking in the divine life for something exterior, that's when the problems start. Those that love money have problems with money. Those that love the body can have problems with physical, sexual desires. Those that love esteem can actually get stuck being very, very famous, but not making great progress in their life because they are solidly somebody physical. And the truth is the reality of what we are is beyond everything we could possibly imagine. And this life that we're living is an unbelievable drama. Many years ago, I was set on this path and given a way to see the life of Jesus. It's not surprising that your senses can go anywhere in this world. You can read books, you can see movies, videos, it's all around this globe. Well, the field of divine consciousness is, of course, superior to that. And at a certain level of our human development, we actually can have reliably, realistically, and provable capabilities like that. And Jesus was moving into that, especially with the divine consciousness that had come in and joined with him. He was christened. And upon that christened, his view was expanded. But still, when your life and potential death stands before you during that night, it was very tough for him. And he would go from feeling and seeing the divine to not feeling it. And I know that because I have been through that kind of experience before. And I've written several books of my life story, Living the Enlightened Life, and my time with the greatest spiritual teacher of our age in my second novel, not knowing that those would be evidence that what I'm going to be talking about here is accurate and true. We know now in this age that there were many things that we thought were true back then that were not true. They would look out in the skies and think that this little planet, which by the way they thought was flat, we are growing in many ways in the last several thousand years, but in the field of spirituality and understanding what the potentialities are of life, we have a way to go. So Jesus during that time at night was going between this feeling of expandedness, of vastness, of great love, to being caught or trapped in a jail. And he was hoping that perhaps some of his devotees, at least individually, he was hoping, would come and speak for him. You know, the conviction rate in the world today is much higher if you don't have an attorney by your side, if you have no witnesses that can speak for you. And really, the leaders, some of the leaders in the Jewish communities had actually planned to convict him for something that was not a crime in the Roman Empire, and that was blasphemy. And this was a special holiday, Passover time, and everybody was anxious to get on to their celebrations, but yet this was something that was happening that Pontius Pilate and the Jewish community needed to deal with. So in a certain sense, they wanted to get it over quickly. And so it was the tradition that on this day, some prisoners would be pardoned, or at least one. And when the trial, it was really a sham trial because the result was already decided. Even those that were going to express their opinions that he should be crucified thought that, okay, well, anyway, if he really is one with the Father, they don't know what that means. This great godly being, whoever it is, he's not floating in the sky, he's very much in us and part of us. He'd come in and save him. And some of those early photos of the experiences during that time show the angels. That the angels didn't have wings, but how could they float into space without wings? Because this is the only way that flying took place. So Jesus went through his dark night of the soul. If you would like, go back and look at my first two novels. I went through a very dark time myself, and Jesus was a man like any man, but a very highly spiritualized being that hadn't completed his journey, but had a job to do. And that job was to bring some grace into that part of the world and relieve those individuals. So he was willing to take it and accept it. He had experienced by this time the unbelievable joy and bliss of the cosmic existence. And I can tell you, my friends, it's greater than anything we could possibly imagine. Possibly imagine. Everything in this world, if you own the entire world and everything in it, would be a small fraction of that kind of intensity, because our senses are inherently limited. He had quietly hoped that, well, maybe somebody will show up and speak for me, that would defend me. And so whatever happens, okay, fine. They have a number of different things he could be convicted of. He could be fined, he could be imprisoned for some time. And the most extreme one is that he could be crucified. So Pontius Pilate was wise in the sense that he didn't want to get embroiled in this. And he really, that morning, after a number of false witnesses spoke against him, saying that he did violate the tenets of his religion, and what he said that he could possibly be one with God was blasphemous. Really understand that. And he just really talked and taught the most simple things. Even the guided meditations that he gave were challenged, where he would sit still, because he learned that from being in the temples of Buddha. He didn't teach any of the advanced things that he had learned in India. They were just way too far. They were too different. So things like the Lord's Prayer, which is really a guided meditation, by the way, I'll create one at some point, show you how that was done. Similar, some of the things that he showed people, I will create a meditation like that you can experience. He was caught, and there was really no way out. And unfortunately, no one came to speak for him. all of his disciples had fled. All of the people that knew him had fled, even though there was a call. Mary Magdalene was about there at that time, and actually several of the individuals that he had healed, a young child, a young boy and girl that I talked about several episodes earlier, were around. Pontius Pilate looked to the crowd that was kind of witnessing this and said, okay, it's Passover, you can free somebody. You should free Jesus because he's innocent. I can't see that he's done anything. And so here on the other side was a criminal, actually a murderer, Barabbas. They could choose. It seemed like an obvious choice, but they actually chose the criminal. For whatever reason, the community was riled up and they were angry and upset. And so he really didn't say much, because even his best words had convicted him. So the decision had been made to crucify him. And to say that he wasn't frightened is just not true. He was frightened. The smallness in us is always frightened. Unless we are totally, completely established in that divine existence. And really, that's the same pathway that we go when we meditate. It's the same pathway. And if we have gone deep into this, our essence, through prayerful meditation, guided meditation, there's many technologies that can make that more powerful and deep. He learned many great ones and had been around some really high beings in India that he'd learned from. He used that just to gain strength. And he was in good health. He was strong, but it was a trial. And he thought that, okay, I will accept this, but maybe at the end, he will be relented. And so the Trail of Tears began on the way to the site of the crucifixion. And there were a lot of people that were jeering the cross, which was what was traditionally used for crucifixion. They'd done many, many crucifixions in their battles, the Romans had. And there were lands that they went into that there was a solid line of individuals that were crucified all the way out from the center of many of the cities. The cross was heavy, and the weight that he was carrying was heavy. Because in a certain sense, he was a doorway to that divine life for the individuals. You see, these higher estates that we're talking about are not an individual achievement. It's not like going to college and you do your training and you get your degree. They're really a group attainment. And if there are not any individuals that are of high being in that community, then the whole society suffers from that and makes mistakes, just like we make mistakes when we are deluded, when we're confused, when we feel full of anger, frustration, and rage. And so he stumbled along the way, and there were some people that threw some rocks at him, and he was jeered, and he was crowned with thorns. They ridiculed the thought that he would be king. He never wanted to be king. He never said that, but they couldn't understand a kingdom without a physical place for that kingdom to be. And the Jewish people yearned for freedom. And now that it looked like he wasn't going to do that, they were angry. And they thought, anyway, he'll be saved along the way if this is true. That was the argument in the mind. That's what my teacher told me many years ago when he outlined this story to me, before I began to experience it in these very high states of consciousness, known as Turiya. This came. And so as he made his way along, it was a difficult trip, carrying this heavy weight along the way. And people were watching, and then along the way, someone did come out and help him because he collapsed a couple of times. Finally, they made it to the location where people were crucified. Essentially, that story is correct. There are some details that were changed over time. That's what happens when hundreds of years go by. and different individuals get a hold of the records, as few as they were, and they changed them in different ways, but essentially the story is true. And I can tell you for sure that when he was laid down and those nails went through his hands into the cross and his feet were pinned, he was struck with fear. We have a safety system that is built into every single nervous system to protect us from some events. And as he was lifted up onto the cross, he was still going through this dark night of the soul. It was later in the day by that time. Took a few hours for the trial, and then a few hours for the setting everything up and getting it ready. And then once he was set up on the cross, he was innocent in the sense that we are all victims of our own mind and emotions. The worst criminal is a victim of his own mind and emotions. Doesn't learn how to get rid of the stress, the frustration, the anger. It confusingly thinks that things of this world are permanent, and that if you had a huge amount of gold or a huge house, that house that can bring fulfillment to your life. It doesn't. Doesn't mean those things aren't worthwhile if you want that, but it's not going to bring you to the place that you're seeking within you, a love beyond all imagination. So there was a protective system built into every one of our bodies. And there are many records about this in the West now. People that are seeing themselves on the operating table and the operation starts, and then all of a sudden they're floating in that space above watching it. There are many documented examples of this. And I share some stories of a friend of mine who received a great healing of a failed heart in my novel, Living the Enlightened Life, that he'd experienced this. See, that pathway that we go out of this world from this body is the same pathway to the oneness within us, which is everywhere. And so as the time passed on, and he felt at one moment totally lost, he did doubt, saying, "How could you possibly forsake me?" That divine being, which was there completely, fully in him all the time, as he took him up into the space above. His senses, we do have senses which are spirit. The eyes can see, the ears can hear, the nose can smell, independent of the physical body. The soul, the individualized being, the little bubble of our existence, is actually bigger than the physical body. And those individuals that practice the techniques for expanding awareness, they feel themselves expanding and pass beyond the body. So this giving up the ghost or being in the space of the divine awareness is common. Everybody does that, both coming in and going out of this world, and a number of times. Actually, we emerge back into that at night when we go to sleep in unconscious deep sleep, but most people are not aware that that happens. And so he moved into that space, into that wonder and amazement, and watched the great drama that was unfolding below him. Mary Magdalene was there watching that, with tears running down her face. And a few others, a young boy and a young girl who had been healed by him. The young boy who was afraid to see and couldn't hear. I told that story earlier, and a few others. He traveled all around, so it wasn't like he had a huge following. But there were a number of individuals, and this was a curiosity there. Just like in the earlier times in Rome, in the Colosseum, people like to come and watch the event. So this was a drama for them. And so he was watching Jesus above, just like an observer there. Gradually, everything slowed down. His body slowed down. And just like going off into a deep sleep, he passed into the oneness beyond, being everything and everywhere, which is the true reality of who and what we are. And the reason for all of these unbelievable events that happen in the universe. From that point of view, it's all good, because in that space, we really do know. We don't believe. Belief is important. Faith is important. You can't do anything without some faith or belief. You won't take one step if you don't believe the floor is going to hold you. And so he moved off into that space. And you can really say that he did give up the ghost, but the body was not finished. And at the end of that time, as nighttime was coming along, normally they would pierce the hearts of those individuals and finish them. I guess that was a little bit of compassion, because it was quite difficult to be strung up like that, like terrorists hung on chains in a prison. So, but what had happened is when they pierced his chest, they didn't do it on the heart side. They did it on the other side. And so this spear that supposedly was to end him in that life, perhaps out of a grace, some of the soldiers had seen some of the things that he had done, and there was a buzz that he was something very special during this time, but it was not like the whole countryside was aware of this. Really, they weren't. And so that's how that period end. He slips off into unconsciousness and up and out of the body. And there were his guides, his angels, subtle beings around that were witnessing this time. You know, they're really there. Even our relatives that have passed can step at that doorway and watch us pass over. Mary Magdalene and the rest of the devotees that were either there in spirit, or a few that were around hidden in the background, felt this is it. It was over. And it seemed as though he had passed out of the body and he was gone. And the silence descended. And then later in that evening, he was taken down, and they prepared a place for him and prepared some ointments for his body, and they put a burial cloth over him. There's some story about what happened to that, the Shroud of Turin. Is it true, or is it not true? We'll come back in the next episode and talk about how that next step in the true spiritual adventure story of the life of Jesus in his years of ministry. It's a very short time, only 2.5 years or so. In the next episode, come back and listen. We'll share what happens next time. So again, this is Dr. Jim Weldon speaking to you from Heavenly Mountain in Boone, North Carolina. And I hope that your time is well spent. The story behind the greatest story ever told. That story is also the story of our life. All right. Bye-bye.